Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I'm Armando F. Sanchez, and I welcome you to this series, the whole series of the Cold War, living under its shadow. My good friend, also a military veteran, Mr. Kurt Hahn, sent me this book. He told me about it, and he shared it, Silent Heroes of the Cold War, Declassified, by Kyril Plaskon. And thank you for sharing the book. And I really went thoroughly through it, read every point of it, reviewed a lot of details on it, and I was saddened by the story. But this show is about discussing the book, his views and mine. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. Just one special note that I wanted to make is that on the back of it are the reviews, and one of them is Francis Gary Powers Jr., founder, Cold War Museum. We had a chance, Kurt Hahn and myself, to talk to him personally, so it's really good to see sort of the cycle and context relating to this book as well. Mr. Hahn, thank you for being on the program.
No problem.
You sent me recently a picture of the monument where this crash site was, before we talk about the background of the book itself. Thank you for those pictures, and we'll refer to them and show them during the show. So I'll begin by asking you your thoughts on the book.
Well, let's take it back a step further. My son and his family live in Las Vegas, and they had gone to Mount Charleston for some Boy Scout thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea what they went for. I just know they went to Mount Charleston. And somehow Mount Charleston rang a bell someplace. And through my web surfing, I found out about this crash site, Mount Charleston, Cold War. I got to look at my notes here. Silent Heroes of the Cold War Memorial, located at Mount Charleston, which is at Las Vegas. I thought, that'd be an interesting thing to go check out, because my son lives in Vegas, and, and so I also have a side hobby. My hobby is to fly US flags at different places and keep a record of all the places my flag has been to. Well, my flag's been to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. It's been to the Thunderbirds Museum in Las Vegas, but it's never been to Mount Charleston in Las Vegas. So I thought, hey, this would be kind of a cool thing to do. Next time we go out there, we should go to Mount Charleston and see this thing. And so the more I kept trying to find out, where is this silly monument at? Because when I say Mount Charleston, that's like saying it's over there someplace. I started reading more and more about what happened there. And they still don't really tell you where it is. Well, about this same time, COVID kind of hit. And of course, everything shuts down. They had a huge fire up there at Mount Charleston about a year ago, and that shuts everything down. And you couldn't get an answer. Is this place even open? Where is this place, So my son, we were talking, my son says, oh, Dad, that's about 20 minutes from here. Really? So we went out there prior to Christmas, and we actually drove up there. And no idea if it was even open or not, but I had read somewhere there's a parking spot close by where you can just walk to the monument. That's all the information we had, So we drive up there and can't find this place for love nor money. Finally, there's a national preserve, national recreation area, some such thing, but it was open. So we pulled into there, and I realized, hey, we're at the right spot. So I asked the lady, where is it? Oh, it's right out the door, about 30 feet that way. And that's when we went and, oh, okay. And then, of course, they have it all laid out. You can see the pictures and you can see the monument and the story behind it. And I have my two grandsons with us, and I bought each one of them a flag for Christmas, with the idea that they would fly that flag on their different Boy Scout adventures and sort of keep, and so then myself and my grandkids, we took pictures of each other, holding our flags in different parts of the monument.
Let
And
me
that's where I found the book.
now let's add some information for our viewers. Background information. What are we referring to it when we say the monument?
Okay. 1950s, something like that.
Right.
There was an U.S. Air Force airplane flying from Burbank to
Area 51.
Area 51. At that time, it was called
It was Waterton.
And heavy, nasty weather, and it crashed into Mount Charleston, killed everybody on board. Well, because of the nature of, I think it was the U-2 airplane they were working on, the Air Force, is in a panic that here's all this classified stuff laying all around, and we got to go get this stuff. Well, it's not like you drive across the street and pick it up. You got to go up, several thousand feet. There's no road. There's nothing. Sub-zero weather, snow, the whole 9 yards. And getting the classified material was more important than bringing the bodies down. And so the book starts off telling the story of how they did that.
How the plane got itself in the situation where it crashed. And then the second part is, like you said, all the details of what went into giving it its sense of secrecy, and then trying to go in and get and retrieve all the materials and the bodies, etc.
Yeah. And then the third part is the actual backgrounds of the people on the airplane.
Right.
Because nobody knew. And part of the reason it crashed was all the secrecy. Nobody knew exactly what was going on because they had to keep everything super duper secret.
Well, the plane was a secret. Its destination was a secret. Everything about it from A to Z. Even the employees themselves could not talk about it to anybody in the family about it, what they were doing.
And apparently the pilot was the only one who knew exactly where they were flying. Well, maybe the co-pilot, but the pilot knew exactly where he was flying to. But all the flight schedules, the flight logs, everything was all secret. So nobody had any real idea where they were, except they were leaving from point A and flying to point B,
And then the most tragic part of the story, already the tragedy of the loss of the passengers who all worked in Area 51, was that the family were also kept in the dark about what had happened.
The families didn't know anything, and nobody told them anything. What the families learned was either through open sources, or they knew somebody who knew some piece of the puzzle, and apparently it was a Boy Scout leader who somehow became obsessed with the idea of this plane crash that, in cohorts with others, actually was the one who didn't write the book, but he did all the research that led to the monument, led to eventually the book, And of course, the more people he talked to, the more information he got, which then the story sort of
it brings a point to surface that there is no period of time in the timeline of information where the military would say, okay, this case has been shut down for 10-15 years, we should start contacting the family and giving them the details. It's like it never happened. At least that's the way I read this book. Someone has to take it on their own initiative to do the background and start going through the process of contacting the family, and then sort of crossing information and back and forth. That's sort of a sad point again for the families.
Well, apparently the military would say something like, your husband died, we have the body, where do you want it, and have a nice day. And kind of left out all the, your father died of a heart attack, but don't open the casket because he's in like 18 pieces. I'm being rather gross and exaggerating, but sometimes the story they told him didn't match.
Yeah, one thing I did remember here reading in the book is that there was announced on local television at the time that there had been an air crash up in the mountains and that there had been a big fire, yada yada. But so it wasn't like it was totally no one knew. It's just the details never got out as to why, what, when, and where.
And I don't think the details have ever gotten out.
Until now, until the book is about, you read the book.
So anyway, that's my take is, I don't think the details should still been revealed.
What's your thought about all this? Mm-hmm. And I ask you more as a veteran.
Well, there is a need for secrecy. And it's just that there is sometimes a price to pay for that secrecy. And unfortunately, these gentlemen paid the price. I've heard, Northrop, who built the B-2, for example, they had a big factory over in Pico Rivera. And there's always a rumor going around that they would have a contractor come in and build part of the factory. And when they were done, another contractor would come in and redo everything so that the first contractor didn't know what the second one had done. There's a price to pay for all that secrecy. And unfortunately, that was one of the points of the book, was one thing that held up all the details is nobody knew where to look because nobody knew where they were flying to or from, or I take it back, flying to, or what route they were taking.
Someone told me, someone had shared with me that there was a shuttle going out of Las Vegas up to Area 51, and they identified the plane for me. They said, look for this and this and this, the red symbols in the back. You'll notice there's no numbers on the plane. You'll notice there's about 4 or 5 of them. So then when I did go to Las Vegas, I went to the area they specified, which is somewhat you could view from the public area around the airport. And I saw the planes there. And obviously these were shuttles. And from this story is somewhat similar, that they were flying them also out of Burbank. And there was one more place. I can't remember where the third place was. But anyway, where the employees were going up there during the week and then coming back on the weekends.
Yeah, they call those Janet flights down there in Las Vegas. What's that airplane? And everybody, what airplane? The one that did what airplane? There's no airplane. What airplane you talking about?
Did the passengers who died know what dangers they were in? And I don't mean the flight itself, but just simply that, their whole commitment to the secrecy of the projects they were in, i.e. the U-2s at the time. And it was an acceptable item as part of their work.
I think the passengers all knew their little piece of the puzzle, but I don't think they had a real idea of what the whole big picture was. They all knew some part. And the merciful thing is, I imagine when the plane crashed, they probably never knew it hit them. They having a cup of coffee or something, all of a sudden, end of that.
My father was a contractor for Convair, and they were flying around the U.S. with a problem of a B-36. Apparently, the problem of some kind of a holding mechanism, holding the nuclear bombs in there. And I don't know if you know the story. In 1957, a B-36 was going to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it dropped a 5 megaton bomb by accident outside of the city limits. And that was because the mechanism wasn't working right. Obviously, it didn't go off because Albuquerque is still there. Somebody asked me, did it go off? I said, last I checked, Albuquerque is still there. But the idea was that he was shuttled in, he was immediately taken around SAC bases to correct that problem. But my dad would always say, you know, we were always in these planes and the weather was miserable, and you know they kept flying us from point A to point B to point C out in the middle of the US. He says, and the planes were rattling all over the place, but we just kept doing our work because we knew that we had to go to all these bases. So, you know, when I read this book, that's the first thing that came back to me. And I remember, starting to remember, my dad says, yeah, there were some scary moments, to the point where once he retired, he said, I'll never get back on a plane again. Not after that experience. You know, if I had to, I will, but leisurely, I'll never get back on a plane again.
Well, I've known guys who've been on, well, for lack of a better word, spy submarines, who would never talk about. They would mention the name of the ship, but that was all they would ever say. You know, where'd you go? Don't worry about it. You know, end of story. You know, the only reason you knew is because of the name of the ship. You know, these guys had a job to do, and I'm sure they did it their best they could. And just one day that flight just didn't end well. I'm not
Well,
making light.
the thing was that these were civilians.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
all of them. I mean, some of them were CIA, of course, but I mean, the majority of them were just civilians.
Yeah. And, you know, the flight crew, I say the only one who apparently really knew where he was going was the pilot. Everybody else was part of the flight crew doing their flight crew thing. It's like if you work on an airline, I imagine after a while, you don't care where you're going. Your job's to keep everybody happy on the airplane, you know. Mm-hmm. Where you're going is kind of irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But again, it was a great book, and I thought you would enjoy it because, like I say, it tied a lot of the stories of your shows and the things I like to do, sort of ties another piece of those cosmic dots together.
Well, after I finished the book, and you know, we agreed to do this show, I sort of sat back and I thought, what do I find that I need to reflect on this book? And I think more than anything, it wasn't so much the unfortunate circumstances to people who knew what they were doing, i.e., they knew they were in a secret program, they knew they had to constantly be secretive with their families, etc. But I find the tragedy of what the families must have gone through to not to be able to find out what had happened to their loved ones, and no closure until this book came around. From what I can tell, you know, when they finally started, you know, dialoguing with them, and then at the end of the book, they show the profile of some of the people who actually were on the plane itself and died over it. I think how tragic for families not to know, you know, what had happened, why they were there, what they were doing, and to learn, like you said, I'm sorry they died, they were in that plane, thank you.
Well, you look at stories going back probably World War II, maybe, of people who were on secret missions all the way up to probably the Gulf War, who died, and you know, nobody knew what was going on or why or where or when, other than the fact that Johnny's not coming home, thank you. You know, families having no idea of when or where. All they know is, think of the Green Berets, the SEALs, the XYZ of forces, you know, on missions, and they die that nobody really knows what was going on. It's a tragic thing, but you know, that's why it's an all volunteer military too. I mean, it's part of the price you pay for. I'm not trying to be callous. It's
No,
just
no, no, no. I mean, that's what the book brings up. I mean, the book brings up these issues. It talks about the discussion of, you know, what the families have to face, and you know, the soldiers themselves know, but the people around them don't. And that's not something I normally think of as well in the tragedies of war or tragedies of the Cold War, where, like you said, people who were on secret missions did lose their lives, and no one will ever know why they lost their lives.
Or if you think about another thing, in the book, they talked about the pilot, amongst others, who it was real easy to say it died because of pilot error. Okay, what if the pilot didn't do anything? The plane crashed. So the family's got to go on thinking, my son caused this problem. Well, it's a horrible thing if your son didn't cause the problem, but publicly the blame. That's happened a lot. It's a horrible thing, but I mean, it's happened.
Well, I especially you worked on different ships in the Navy. Machines do break down. They don't work the way they're supposed to. They're in weather situations that, they strain the system, and then machines break down. I go back to that. They malfunction. And sometimes if they malfunction in the middle of a major operation or something, you pay the price for that malfunction. And these machines are under a lot of stress. And again, these are all things that all of us, not just people who have family members in the military, but I think all of us, we all share the responsibility of the military activity. And we have to think that the pain goes beyond just the person who's actually in the battlefield, or in this case, died at the mountaintop.
I always go back to, you're sitting in front of a machine, it's doing something strange, and you call somebody over and you go, what do you do when that happens? That never doesn't happen. Well, okay, what do you do when that? Well, that doesn't happen. What do you do when that happens? Well, that doesn't happen. And you're going, okay, we're getting nowhere quick, when things go strange and nobody seems to have the reason why,
Well, how many times, radars malfunction? That's a huge statement, of all the possibilities that we're talking about. Shooting down airplanes that are not fighter planes, or misidentify things, or being in the wrong place, wrong time, running into things in submarines. The systems will malfunction.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many rocks we've tracked as being ships.
Well, tell me that one, because I know you were a radar person on ships.
You pick up some rock, just some rock out in the ocean someplace.
Well, you mean like something sticking out of the water, or some kind of little mound?
Yeah, just some, even along a coastline, just some rock somewhere to get you a radar reflection. Well, as you approach this rock, that rock's on the same course and speed opposite of what you've got, because it's bouncing back, And I can't tell you how many times we said that's a rock. No, it's not. And they go through all these evasive maneuvers, or they don't go through, and that's even scarier. Because somebody does, well, there's a return right there. That's got to be a contact. And you said, no, that's, well, what do you know? Okay. Smash. Oops.
It didn't move out of the way.
It's the old story of the captain of the aircraft carrier calling the ship that's in its way to get out of his way. And the final part of the joke is, I'm a lighthouse. What are you going to do?
You made me think right now. I hadn't thought of this. It had crossed my mind until this moment. Yesterday, the underwater volcano in Toga exploded. And I'm assuming that there was some seismic activity prior to sort of alerting that it was going to explode. But I didn't read that. But I can assume that a certain amount of military ships were in the neighborhood, whether it be underwater or above water. Could they have been there and got caught in this thing?
Who knows? I go back to, they had this huge volcano in Tonga that erupted, and we had tsunami alerts for the whole west coast of North America. And I just saw this deal on internet news a little bit ago that Santa Cruz had an extra 6 or 7 feet of water, and they're claiming massive tsunami damage. All of LA County was shut down. I mean, all the beaches on the west coast of North America, and the water raised 3 or 4 feet.
Yeah, and it sort of brought all the surfers out to the beach that they weren't supposed to be on. That cracked me up a lot.
And everybody drives out there to watch the tsunami come in. But
The idea was if there was a ship out there, well, because that's a very very challenged area in terms of many countries having ships out there, especially the Pacific. But being off the coast of Australia, I wonder whether anybody got caught in that.
well, who's to say? But can you imagine being on a cruise ship and getting this message that says, okay, there's seismic activity in this area, and you need to divert over that way someplace, and you're a cruise ship going from point A to point B. Now you're being told to divert to point C. Oh, that's got to go over well with the cruise ship company and everybody else,
I'm going to tell a personal story on that. I was on a cruise ship from Los Angeles to Hawaii. Halfway there on our second sea day, there was a earthquake up in Alaska. Or Northern California, I think it was. I don't know the activity, 6, 7 points. I don't know. So anyway, there was a tsunami being created from there, headed toward Hawaii, and apparently it was going to come under the ship. We were supposed to feel it, if you will. And the big deal was for the captain to come online, and he says, yes, the tsunami will run past us, underneath us, and it should raise the ship about an extra inch.
Yeah.
Because it's so deep that we'll never feel the wave. And we hope the best for Hawaii. Well, apparently nothing happened to Hawaii, but the moment we landed, there was all these people selling T-shirts, which I wish I had bought. It said, "I survived the tsunami." But out in the deep water, you're not going to feel anything. It's only the coastlines that feel the tsunamis themselves. I learned that firsthand. So actually, I think the safest place to be would be out in the middle of the ocean on the cruise.
Yes. On the other hand, I can remember being out in the middle of the ocean, seeing 30, 40-foot waves, and oh boy,
Yeah, but you guys were looking for that kind of trouble in the Navy.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you did know they were there. The storm was coming. Come on, you guys have the best ability to know where the storms are, and you guys still sit out there in the middle of the storms. I mean, come on, give me a break.
Well, I can remember leaving Subic Bay and being chased by a typhoon all the way down to Singapore or someplace like that before it got, that we could turn around and go back, But anyway, that's a whole nother.
Do all the ships are able to run out of the typhoon, or some get caught?
Depends on the state of the ship. We had to ride one out in port because we couldn't go we physically couldn't go anywhere. One of the carriers there in Subic Bay, I forget which one, they had every yard tug at the shipyard outboard of the carrier doing nothing but pushing it into the pier because of the way the typhoon was blowing. And two of the tugs burned up because
they could only do so much.
Yeah, but they had every tug at the base there keeping this carrier to the pier, because they couldn't go anywhere. I mean, they could not go anywhere.
In open ocean, it would have been far worse.
Of course, being anchored out in the bay didn't help either, but I mean,
but you were not on a carrier, so you guys were expendable.
Yeah, thank God I wasn't on Minesweepers, but but it's like the book, it's a sad, very sad story, but it's part of that life that it's a part of the life that nobody knows about unless they read or do any kind of. And you've done enough stories about Cold War to know, and you've met enough people to know that there's stories out there that nobody knows about because they've never been told. And only some small piece because the guy who was there. So that one small piece that 90% of humanity has no clue of what you're talking about,
On top of that, to add to that, and thank you for that comment, is that every new book you read, every more information you ask, or you run into individuals, or get to visit these locations as this monument has. And I know we're going to show a picture of what the monument looks like. Um, we lose a sense of appreciation for the work that people did. And that's one of my missions when I go on cruise ships lecturing on, the Cold War and espionage, to highlight and say, we're here to remember the individuals. There's their stories that they can't talk about, but we should know about it, and we should acknowledge them, and we should be very grateful for them. And
Yeah.
grant you, once in a while, you get stories in the media of things have gone wrong that they did, or that they fumbled. But my last point on this issue is, how many stories were successful, but we will never hear about them.
I read somewhere the CIA, the only agency in the world, gets all credit for their mistakes, but no rewards for their successes. Something to that effect. I personally like to go to some of these obscure places because I want to hear the stories. I want my flag to go to these places so I can go with it. And to say it means more when you've been there.
So let's recap something you've said in other previous shows. You are hopeful, I know, of someday raising your flag in Area 51, but don't try it now.
Well, yeah.
Because if they ask me who you are, I say, I don't know, never met the man. He was always a cuckoo guy with cuckoo ideas.
I know that my flag has been flown inside the NORAD base in Colorado Springs. It's Colorado Springs. I have no idea where, how. I just knew the guy who knew the guy who, and there's a picture in front of the information center inside the mountain, right? How, I
don't want to know.
I don't care. I just, and I'm too lazy to drive to Vegas and then drive another 100 and some miles out in the middle of nowhere to go up to the gate at the base, which is out in the middle of nowhere, to stand there and do this, even though I'm on public land. I've seen YouTube videos of people, but I don't want to be the guy who sneezes and trips on the wrong side of the white line and oops.
Well, warn me if you ever intend to go up there so that I can begin to erase everything that I know about you. Yeah, it's fascinating that even today, given everything we know, there's still a lot of information that the place doesn't exist. So it just adds to the mystery of it all. So,
well, I have a friend of mine. He used to work at the fire station. It was next to the Northrop plant when they were building the B-2. So they would go outside the fire station and sit up on top of the picnic tables where they could see over the wall into the Northrop parking lot, I guess. And that was great entertainment for them, was to go sit out on the fire department property on top of the picnic tables where they could see into and then, what their watch is, figure how long it was going to be before the security trucks would show up and tell them to move on. It became sort of a game with them, And I guess finally one of the security guys came out and said something like, "You guys just please, you're just causing no end of hate and discontent. You just,
Well, I'll share some background on that, because that's where my father was associated with, even though he was on another Northrop plant over in Hawthorne. It used to be the assembly area for Ford Motor Companies. And then they sold it, but no one knew why, when, and where. Mm-hmm. And then, unbeknownst to anybody, they started digging underground and went, I think, 2 floors. And then down there, they started building the B-2. Now, you're in the middle of a major metropolis, and you see all these cars coming in and out, and you figure nobody knew that they were building the plane in there. I still don't know how they got the pieces out. They must have, broke it down and then taken them somewhere and assemble. Maybe, I don't know, maybe up in Lancaster or something. But building these massive secret planes that carry some of the largest nuclear armament, and being built right in the middle of the east side of Los Angeles. So it's really quite a fascinating story unto itself.
Well, you go back to the story. Where'd all that dirt go?
I wondered that.
It's like they saying Area 51, a lot of it's underground. How do you move that much dirt and put it where? Dig
Oh,
another hole?
no, well, you can throw it up in the mountain. I mean, you just have to decide of the mountain. But here's a question for you. Okay, maybe you can help me with this. We'll get into our last conspiracy question here. Um, how do you build a runway, a massive runway? And these runways were extraordinarily thick.
Yeah.
How do you get cement trucks and all the personnel to build that and then say there's a secret base but no one knows anything about? Okay, run that one by me.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget 20 some odd years ago, there was a picture on Popular Science magazine taken by a Russian spy satellite overhead Area 51. And the cover was, "That picture does not exist." And, 10 years later, here's the same picture, same view with, everything bigger and more massive. And that doesn't exist either. And by the way, this is taken by a Russian spy satellite, X-way,
Well, right now we have so many darn satellites, is those little cube satellites flying around. I mean, it's not like you can keep the place away. I mean, you can't put a big tarp on it and say it's not there, but we continue to say it's not there. So
I'll never forget watching TV one day shortly after the B2, well, before the B2 was rolled out. And there was a guy up at Plant 42 up in Palmdale, live at 5, newscast, standing there on the part, on the outside the freeway. Okay, the building behind you that you do not see, is allegedly the home for the aircraft that is not being built in the building that you do not see behind me. Nobody will claim or, confirm or deny there's an actual building, and you can see the cars and the, trucks and,
the Skunk Works building back there. Yeah, I've seen it.
But you don't see that. It's like, But anyway, no, I'm very glad I went. I learned something new, and it just put another piece of a cosmic puzzle together that has no picture to work from, but it just made, I like to think of myself as the senior researcher for AFS Productions.
You are. You're one of the better ones as well.
No.
And this is a story. It says, and I'll close with the statement on here, and I think that's what we're trying to get across. And obviously, we are honoring individuals associated with this story. And it says, a mysterious military plane crash on the Nevada mountain peak, and the families who endured an abyss of silence for generations. So I think that's where we get this whole idea that we need to always listen to the stories of people who were and are silent warriors to keep us safe. Many do give up their lives through accidents or through other means, and we're forever and eternally grateful for their commitment. And also for people in the military that are doing secret jobs like you did as well. We didn't talk about that. And thank you for your service, and thank you for what you did. And don't go to Area 51, okay?
Well, I want to say, in regards to this book and every other story, it's done with a degree of humor, not disrespect.
Absolutely.
I mean, absolutely no disrespect to the family members or anybody doing these stories I tell are meant with try with a certain degree of humor. So I don't want anybody misinterpreting that I'm making light of anything.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And we support it. Sometimes I think we have a nervous laugh. We feel for these individuals. Having seen the U2s, having talked to people in these projects, like I mentioned earlier, we met Francis Gary Powers Jr. and got to talk to him about his father. And these are very tragic stories. And yet I remember him telling us a few stories that we were laughing our heads off. That is about his own father, even though it was such a tragic story, or the ending for him. But you have to have both. But you're absolutely right. It's we dedicate this whole show out of sheer respect for the individuals and the family, and there's never anything else less than that in our shows, and you always come across that way.
You know, I remember he did a story with one of the colonels, Air Force colonels that flew the U-2. And you know, wasn't as famous as Powers, but the point was he did a lot of those flights and stuff, and some of his experiences. And you know, it's just another day in paradise flying over Russia when the engine blew up. You know, just no big deal. We just, you know.
Yeah, I remember Colonel Austin. We talked to him, and you know, he flew the old 47s, and then he flew SR-71, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And he had us rolling. I mean, you know, people died on that project, and you know, fellow persons died, and yet he had us rolling about it. So it was sort of the balance. That's how they keep balance in their lives, and I learned that also. But it was never a sense of any kind of disrespect ever.
But anyway, it was just, I say that, and I enjoy going to, and Mount Charleston's only 15 miles from Vegas, something like that. It's not that far away, you know.
But it's not something you're going to find on the book that says here it is, and you know, straight line to it. So we're going to try to pinpoint some of the items. If I can find a map, I know the book has a map in it, but it's really poor. But if we find out more information, we'll keep posting it on there.
The memorial apparently is at 7,000 some feet, and the actual crash site's another 4,000 feet up or something like that, because apparently they only missed the crest by 400 or 500 feet or something like that. But you can't get to there. You know, you can only get, and that's all I cared about was, you know, because apparently there's still wreckage up there that it's still there. You know, how much is still there? I mean, I don't know, but
well, don't they consistently find bodies still laid around out in the Himalayas from climbers that went up there, and they just figured, you know, that's just the momentum, or that was just the expectation that if you died up there, they leave you there.
Yeah. Well, they find people who've been dead for years in all kinds of strange places. They just, you know,
so didn't even know they were there.
Yeah.
Sure. You never know.
Pull cars out of lakes with bodies that have been in them for 30 years. I mean.
Yeah. That happened the other day. I remember I saw the story. They finally found the person in his car under a river. So, Mr. Han, I want to thank you. Mr. Han is a very, very close friend of mine. We've been talking about these topics for a long time. You have S3 Productions. You're the CEO and all the positions that deal with that department as well. And I want to thank you and continue your ongoing success. And I want to take a second to applaud you and recognize you for 1,000 podcasts out there. So as we close the show, could you give us the name of your podcast page?
Okay, I'm going to say this with the cravat. Most of those, they're old 78 record shows. They're very short. That's where the bulk of them came from. But it's on facebook.com/S3 Productions 2 or Forgot Music on 78 RPM Records.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Continue the success of doing your podcast as well. And thank you for being a fantastic research assistant director for us, and continue to bring these stories to us as well. Thank you very much, Mr.
All right. Thank you, sir.